Have you ever felt stuck in a cycle of ups and downs? What if I told you there's a hidden reason behind it? Stay tuned to find out what might be holding you back. And speaking of navigating challenges, I was blown away when I met Tomas Sidenfaden, the founder and CEO of Nuprizm. His company is tackling a huge issue, helping us see through the bias in the news. Tomas has a fascinating background in the music industry, where he built and sold products, and he's led teams all over the globe. Plus, he's also a DJ and even the lead singer in a band. Honestly, I can't wait to hear how he's figured out a way to solve this problem. Stick around, you won't want to miss this. Let's dive into the world of Nuprizm and discover how Tomas turned his passion for tech and music into a powerful tool for understanding the news. What inspired him? What hurdles did he overcome? Get ready to be inspired. Tomas had a big vision for Nuprizm, driven by his frustration with media bias. He taught himself to code, built a team, and combined AI with public sentiment to create a unique news platform. His key? Validate your ideas early and be passionate about the problem you're solving. By focusing on daily public sentiment, he's shaping how we understand news. Check out nuprizm.com and see how you can apply these lessons to your own journey. Welcome to the Founders Show, where we dive into the amazing stories of startups and visionaries. Today we're thrilled to have the founder, Tomas Sidenfaden, join us. This show is all about inspiring you and helping you grow, whether you are just starting or looking to scale up. So let's get started. Building Nuprizm, if I'm not mistaken. So would love to understand what is Nuprizm about, if you could, help any layman understand what you're building today.
Sure. So Nuprizm is a social news platform with the goal of helping readers navigate bias in the news. So to do that, we combine AI-powered insights with public sentiment, and our MVP's available in the App Store now. It's an iOS app, and we've got a really exciting roadmap that really digs deep into this problem space, which, the timing is interesting for our conversation. I think that everybody recognizes that it's difficult to actually understand what's happening in the world, given our current media environment. So our goal with Nuprizm is to help people navigate that, and we're off to a good start.
That's amazing. And what got you to come up with this whole idea of Nuprizm? Where did it all start? If you can help me understand a little bit about the background of how you came up with this whole problem that you're trying to solve.
Sure. So actually, interestingly enough, I came up with this idea in the 2016 election cycle. I was under the impression then that we weren't quite getting the full understanding of public sentiment and how the election might ultimately end up. I was right about that. And at that time, I really didn't know how to code. So I started first with wireframe drawings and entering a submission to Y Combinator with me holding up wireframe sketches and trying to just spell out the nature of my idea. It's been a long road since then. So I taught myself to code. I got experience as an engineer, and I moved from where I'm at now. I'm in Los Angeles up to San Francisco to take a job there. And I started ultimately building this on nights and weekends around 2020. And I had a former engineer who was a contractor at my employer who expressed some interest in helping me build it, which was, really a deciding factor in moving ahead, because there was a lot of twists and turns just getting to that point. And so then we started building the platform end to end around that.
Gotcha. That's really inspiring, the way you taught yourself to code and literally going back to -1 and all the way to 0 and 1. Would love to really understand about how did that happen and what were the challenges that you faced? Because if I'm not mistaken, as you said, you were doing a lot more product design, and that's majorly your background. How did you navigate that? Would love to get some insights.
Yeah, good question. Interesting characterization. I haven't heard going from -1 to 0, but it definitely felt that way. So yeah, my prior experience in my career was actually in product. I was a product manager for Guitar Center stores prior to beginning this project. And in that role, I was doing cradle to grave product management for hardware products in the music product space in the tech world. So think digital pianos, digital drum sets, microphones, headphones, signal processing equipment, loudspeakers. And that was a really interesting experience for me. I really enjoyed it for the most part, largely because I had the ability to take ideas and big plans and actually turn them into action at every step of the way. And that involved a lot of work with international manufacturing factories and in working and managing engineering teams abroad. So that was kind of my first insight into that experience, but I was not an engineer at that point. When I had this idea in 2016, I said, okay, well, ultimately, if I want to build a company like this and I want to run an organization like this, it's really important that I'm actually an engineer, right? I think that's an expectation I had back then. I think that's an expectation of most people, in the B2C social space now. You really want to be a technical founder. So I left Los Angeles in order to save some money so I could work part-time. So I moved out to Palm Springs, where it's less expensive to live. And I have friends and family living there. And I spent about half my time teaching myself to code and the other half working to make ends meet. And that was about a year. I had hoped it would take less time than that, but it felt like it was about a year before I was really employable. And then I spent another year trying to find work, and breaking in was quite difficult. Ultimately, when I finally had that role, I was just kind of scraping by. I had a few different part-time jobs, piecing together the money just to stay afloat. And then I got a job offer from a company in the Bay Area called X2X Media Group. They're called Pix System at the time, leading company supporting the film industry with a cloud-based SaaS platform. Sorry for all the notifications here. From there, I moved up to the Bay Area. I spent 3 years there. I moved in 2019, and then there was a year later, the pandemic hit, and the last 2 years of my experience there were basically living alone in my apartment in Oakland. So I really took the opportunity there, since life was kind of shut down, to just really dig into building this platform. And wasn't really confident I could build it end to end at that point. My focus had been on the front side as an iOS engineer. The contractor I mentioned earlier was a peer of mine at that employer, and he said, "Well, I think we could build this end to end." And we already knew how to write code in Swift, and server side Swift is actually out there, and that's a way to build platforms on the back end. So we decided to give that a shot. So, we spent a good portion of 2020 fumbling through our way, trying to do server-side development and building the iOS app at the same time. And doing that on nights and weekends, it's hard to make real deep and serious and fast progress. So ultimately, in 2022, I raised a small pre-seed round from friends and family. I felt like at that point, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. So it made sense to try and raise money to accelerate shipping. So I brought on a few contractors who were actually the developers of some of the frameworks that I use in the platform. So I've had the great honor of working alongside some really fantastic engineers. We shipped the MVP in 2023. And this was right around the time that ChatGPT was released. At that time, realized, okay, AI is actually becoming accessible for other applications, LLMs in particular. And so at that time, I said, okay, well, there's a real opportunity here to integrate AI into this platform. So I shifted the roadmap. So the seed phase roadmap really focuses on integration of AI to solve this mission. And actually, we have our first AI feature, which is AI-powered article summaries, coming out here in the next couple of weeks.
Gotcha. That's really interesting, and congrats on on the journey so far that you've gone through that whole space and eventually raised some money. And I think that's a great validation, not just from customers, but having the first believers to support you can also like give you some sort of like validation. Okay, like I'm on the right path. People are willing to support me, and I think that's a great boost. Um, and what was like the most challenging part of building your startup from the ground up? Uh,
Up until this point, I'd say there's been different challenges at different phases. So the very first challenge was trying to understand how I could actually build a platform and ship it. So I went through this kind of painful process of doing all the validation that I could in advance before actually building it to find out if there's actually demand for it. And that's really difficult to do. I'd say that was one of the biggest first problems, was trying to validate demand. When I mention what the platform's mission is, everybody immediately understands it and they say, "Oh yeah, we actually need that." But trying to make that concrete was challenging. I'd say the second challenge was really technical. So I had to learn actually how to do all this stuff. So that was, understanding the cloud environment and development operations and server-side development, and going 0 to 1 with the iOS app, which was not something I'd done before. So
Gotcha.
putting all those things together was incredibly challenging, particularly during the pandemic when it's difficult to really network with people. So there was a lot of, me banging my head against the wall, trying, spending hours and days and weeks trying to fix, what now seemed to me like simple bugs. The challenge after that was, a people challenge. So, in retrospect, I probably would have spent more time doing networking. My expectation, I don't think this was incorrect at the time, was, I don't have this pedigree like some other founders have, where I went to Stanford and I've got a master's in computer science, and I worked for Facebook. So I was going to have to get further along in order to be successful in ultimately raising like institutional capital. So I felt like focusing on building was really important. But the next problem I ran into was just trying to recruit people. So ultimately, I've come to the realization that, me as a solo founder, without that type of experience, particularly in AI, it was going to be necessary for me to bring somebody on board as, either a co-founder or a CTO. And I spent a really long time trying to find the right person. And that's been a real challenge because we're just entering a seed phase, trying to raise capital. And trying to do that as a solo founder without experience in AI, I felt like would be a death knell. It's not 2021 anymore. People aren't just throwing money randomly at businesses. And trying to find somebody to work in an equity-only kind of space up until funding is secured is incredibly challenging. I think if I had the money in the bank, I had some really incredible people that I spoke with that interested in the mission. But if you can't write a check, you got to be looking for somebody that's just really passionate about solving the problem and has the capacity to do it. So I say that was the next biggest problem. And then the existential place I think we find ourselves now is we ultimately really need to raise capital in order to accelerate building the product and finding product market fit.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, great. Well said. You also mentioned about attending a lot of events. Like, what's your take on events like in the current landscape? Do you think attending events is overrated, or it actually helps, finding the right investors, or meeting the right people who could support you in the journey? We met at the LA Tech Week, I guess, and that's how we connected. So I don't know what's your take on it. You think it's worth the time, like, going to these events and spending, because it's a lot of distraction as well, right? I mean, when you're doing events, you're just distracted. I mean, forget about working, right? I mean, that whole week is just like distraction. Um, yeah, what's your take on that? Like, how do you think about events, and how frequent do you like attend these events to fulfill your fundraising objective?
My personal preference would be I'd rather just be nose down, grinding it out, building. I think I can do the things like sales and marketing and raising money. We'll see on the last one. But those are necessary things. It depends on the type of business you're trying to build. If you can fully bootstrap it yourself, maybe you can avoid doing that. I think for businesses where you need capital, you absolutely have to network, and you need to do it probably earlier than you anticipate because there's a really long tail. And try to view every person you meet as an opportunity. I've really been surprised at people that I've met in the past that I understand are actually now connected to people that I really want to be introduced to, and I have a rapport with them, so it's possible to do that. I'd say that particularly when it comes to raising capital, your odds are infinitely better if you can get a warm intro. So doing
Absolutely.
the work, even if it feels like you're not getting anywhere, you're making connections with people who have connections, and that process kind of extrapolates. So the more people you can go out there and meet, the better. And there's, I think, some skill involved in trying to find the right people and to be judicious about how you spend your time at events. It's very easy to spend a whole bunch of time talking to people that aren't particularly, you're not going to be in a position to help them, and they're not in a position to help you. And it seems kind of transactional. But you're all there for really a professional purpose. So you have to just focus your efforts on trying to meet people that are, for me, are in the same space in the journey or slightly ahead of me, so I can learn how they got there. And then meeting investors, knowing that they're not going to write me a check tomorrow. It might be 6 months, it might be a year, but have that first conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's about that follow-ups and keeping them updated in the loop. And what I've like seen from the VC world is that when you're hot, you raise, right? So when you're actually in that stage where people are reaching out to you and you've built some momentum within the community or network of investors, and you've got like a lead investor, and that's when everyone jumps on the board, right?
Right.
That's my take, but would love to understand like what's your learning been so far in terms of fundraising and speaking to investors, and how do you see this whole space as of today with all this AI bubble and AI startups like coming, left, right, center across the whole place, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that I think I felt like I needed to be further ahead than all of my peers in order to be successful, with this project. So when I first started, that was, it was kind of a crazy space because, like I mentioned, 2020, 2021, there's all this dry powder, and, investors are really loosey-goosey. They'll invest in people who just have an idea. And I'd said to myself, it's not going to be good enough that I just have an idea. I'm not even comfortable with that. So I need to go out there and build a prototype, right? But by the time you build a prototype, the expectation has moved, right? Now you need an MVP. And now once you've built an MVP, the expectation is going to move again, right? Now you need traction.
Absolutely.
And once you have traction, you're still not there. Now you need to be, at revenue. And once you're at revenue, the revenue needs to be consistently increasing. And it's frustrating because you say, okay, what point does the investor, actually provide value to me, right? If I have to do all of these things on my own, then
absolutely.
If I get to the point where I'm post revenue and it's growing quickly, I don't need an investor. So I'd say that's been a kind of a frustrating learning experience for me. I do think that if I had, nurtured some of those relationships earlier and tried to really establish a dynamic where I could say, hey, listen, you're not going to invest in me now, but let me show you how I'm going to continue to ship and hit these milestones. And they could see that, we're consistently able to do that. that the conversation when you go for the ask is a lot different than, if you show up as a cold outreach in somebody's email inbox. Relative to AI, as you're mentioning, I think that there's an expectation in the investment community that you're going to be employing AI unless there's some really significant reason why you would not do that. So it's almost table stakes now. I think one of the advantages with Nuprizm is that we're not just bolting AI onto the experience. So there's plenty of startups that say, okay, we're trying to solve this problem, and now we're trying to solve this problem with AI. And you can't quite understand what exactly the AI is doing. But, Nuprizm, we're dealing with language and media, and LLMs are trained on words. And that's a big component of how people perceive and ingest information. So it's a perfect use case for the application of AI. So really, it's exciting to integrate it into the platform.
Gotcha. Amazing. And in the previous conversation, you mentioned about the last elections actually triggered you to start, thinking about this problem. Did you see any similar trends in this election as well? The one just happened like 2 days ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I have.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things I said to myself in 2016 was, how can we be at this kind of sophisticated a time when it comes to technological development and interconnectedness with social media, and just be so surprised at what is essentially one of the most important events that's happening in anybody's life at this time. Like this, when it gets to election day, we should kind of already know what's happening, right? Like we shouldn't be surprised. And that was one of the big impetuses or big incentives for me building this platform, right? It's like, I want to be able to capture that public sentiment. I want policymakers, the general public, industry to really understand kind of, the pulse of the people, disintermediated from how media positions it to you largely. There's a big gap there. And you saw this gap yet again here just a couple of days ago, where there was a big narrative in the media that this was a very tight race. And in fact, all of the very different types of polling were showing it to be that way as well. So, we went into that day thinking, well, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but it's going to be a nail biter. And it felt that way even in the early parts of the day. And then, you got to the end of, election day, and I was like, okay, actually, no, this is actually a relatively decisive victory. And, all of these swing states that we're talking about how individual counties are going to perform, like, they all went one way. And that's largely, it's a big miss by news media to not be able to identify that. And I think that, we have the technology to be able to predict that with greater accuracy now. One example, I think that's been kind of a standout there, is Polymarket. I don't know if you heard of this company, but it's basically like an online betting site. People can bet on, who's going to be a whole bunch of things. But one of them was like, who's going to win the presidential election. And that was better prediction than, dozens of polls by major respected organizations. So obviously there's a better way to do this. And then, beyond just like kind of the deep analytics, I think the public sentiment angle is critical. And there's really a way to bring forward what essentially is public sentiment and, how people are feeling about any particular policy, any particular piece of news on a daily basis, ongoing, right? So we don't have to wait every 4 years for this massive signal dump, but instead, we get these signals every day and we can respond to them every day. It makes society more dynamic. It makes us better understand the world in which we live. It helps us to, formulate solutions to social and political problems with greater fluidity and knowledge.
Gotcha. That's quite interesting. Yeah, absolutely, man. Like I totally agree with what's happening out there. And hopefully you guys are going to solve this big problem, and looking forward to how you guys grow in the next couple of years. I'll just keep it like short, like another 5 minutes. Last two questions. So just looking back, in your complete experience of, working for companies, and then building your own startup, what are you most proud about in your entire journey as of today that you feel that you've really accomplished something? We'd love to understand that.
Sure. I'd have to say it's just the technical acumen. When I first started on this journey, I did not at all believe that I had the capacity to build and ship this product end to end. And, to be clear, I did not do this all on my own. But I've been the primary force behind it. And, I've touched every part of the code base. I know how it's all configured. I can explain it in great detail. I'm excited to build rather than terrified, which is where I started. And I can understand how to build the pieces going forward and how to scale it. So I would say that's the thing that I'm most proud of. There's plenty of other things that I've learned and I think have evolved significantly, but that's the big standout thing for me personally.
Gotcha. Amazing. Congrats on that. And what's your advice to someone who wants to, build a startup or is like at a very early stage in his or her journey? What would be like your one or two pieces of advice that you would give someone who's just starting out?
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember, starting this journey with this business and, just being really obsessed with the problem. And I would say that that's a really important aspect, perhaps the most important aspect of being successful, because, if this were some sort of problem that just didn't interest me at all, and there's plenty of like meaningful problems out there, for people to solve that just aren't exciting for me, solving some kind of niche SaaS issue for businesses in a space I don't really care about, I don't know, finance or something, right? That's not a space that I care that much about. I would not have the desire to live and breathe it for so long, right? And I've been doing that, and I'm excited to wake up every day and work on it. And I think that that's a key component of success. It's really surprising to me, actually, because on this journey, I've learned about how other people started startups, and I think it was Airbnb. I might be mistaken about this, but there's certainly some companies out there where they, founders have said, or engineers or product people, whoever they are, I want to start a startup. What should I build? And that's never been an issue for me. I've got a dozen startup ideas in my head right now. If I could clone myself, I'd work on all of those as well. So I would say, the biggest thing I could suggest to somebody starting out is, one, make sure you're solving a real problem people actually have and try to figure that out as quickly as possible. Doesn't matter if it's dirty and scrappy, like do what you can to validate that, and make sure it's a problem you actually care about. Those things are paramount.
Absolutely. Gotcha. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Thomas. It was like a pleasure, having you on this show.
Thanks for listening to The Founder Show. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing stories. If you're an inspired startup founder and want to share your journey, we'd love to feature you on our podcast. Just visit founder.show to sign up. Keep dreaming big, and we'll see you next time.